let's start. Thank you all for being here. Let's talk about broken build tools and bad habits. And I'm only going to talk about Maven this time. My name is Robert Scholte. You can see my Twitter handle, so if you have any questions, just post them on Twitter or do it afterwards, because I have like 36 slides, and normally I do 1 slide per minute, so I have to speed up a little bit. Okay, let's go. When I was preparing this presentation, I was seeing this episode of Air Crash Investigation. Who knows this? Yeah. Well, okay, so here's one about the Comair flight, and there's something special about this, because, well, as you can see, there is it crashed for some reason, and the reason was atmospheric icing and pilot error leading to loss of control. However, in the end, the pilot was not the one to blame, and the reason is that, well, you see a picture in the upper corner. I won't go into detail, but one of the most important things is that the thing that this pilot did was no longer valid for the newer generation. So he was flying in a newer airplane, and there were some instructions he was doing, because he used to do that for the old plane, but for the newer plane that wasn't required anymore. And the issue is, we're having exactly the same issues nowadays, we as programmers, developers, etc. So suppose we're starting at a new project. There is already a lot of code, and what do? We start analyzing the code, seeing what this project does, what does the code do. If we don't understand some things, we go to Google or Stack Overflow. Hopefully they give us some answers what this application is trying to do, especially with some specific frameworks. And of course, we can always ask our colleagues for a little bit of help. But what if things start to fail? Because in the end, of course, things will start to fail. Again, we're going to analyze. We're Google, we go to Stack Overflow, getting some bad advices, of course. We ask our colleagues, and then we are going to fix it, or we can figure out a workaround. But the issue is with the workaround, how long are we going to use this workaround? So do we really keep up? So if the fixes are already done in the dependencies, do we update those dependencies? I see quite often that these kinds of workarounds, they turn into patterns. And patterns really control the people's system. I'm pretty sure that everybody recognizes that if you have a password policy, like you have to change it for every month, the first day you had to change your password, you still are using the old one, right? So, and this is exactly the same issue we see right here. So, in general, we always ask, we see this issue, it works on my machine, and what are the root causes? Well, in the end, it's all about differences in either local code changes. Yes, this might be, this makes a lot of sense, of course, but I've seen it a couple of times that people came to me and they said, it's not working anymore. Did you change the code? Oh, yes, I think so. Okay, let's try to evaluate that first. Of course, the operating system, as you might have noticed, I'm on Windows, so most terrible operating system for most of the people. The JDK itself can, of course, be an issue, but Maven itself as well, like Maven 2, Maven 3, there are a lot of versions, and they all come with a little bit of changes, even though we try to be as much as backwards compatible as possible. Then there are things that can happen with files, and we're talking about regular files and directories, and also properties that can, these are in the end the things that can be different between one system or the other, and then that can say it works on my machine or not. So let's zoom in a little bit in the files part. So, as you might know, Maven is using a local repository, and what is in the end a local repository? It is a dependency cache. So if you are asking for a specific dependency, it will look into the local cache there. If it's not there, it will go to the internet, try to download it, and from that moment on, it is in your local cache. Which also means it is without time to live. Once it is in your local repository, it will never be removed, unless you do it yourself. So, and this is the location where you can find your local repository. So by default, it is put in your user home directory. There's a .m2 with a repository folder in it, and from that point on, there are a lot of dependencies to find. The local repository is a little bit broken. So in Maven 2, it was really a stupid cache. So once it was downloaded, it will stay there forever. So in Maven 3, we changed a little bit, and these are the things that changed between Maven 2 and 3. Most of the things you won't notice as an end user, but under the hood, we changed quite a important things. And one of the things is that with Maven 3, we are verifying the existence of already downloaded artifacts. For instance, if you had your project and you build it at a certain time and somebody else comes in, and in the meantime, some important remote repository has disappeared, it might happen that his project won't build anymore and it is still building on your machine because you're using this local cache. In Maven 3, it will detect it by verifying this specific file. You can disable it. There are some projects or plugins that are having issues with it, and with this specific option you can turn on the original way of validating and using the legacy local remote repository, as we call it, and you can also set it via a system property. Also important to know, in Maven Central we have checksums, but they are not verified by default. So if you download it, we don't check the checksums by default. The reason is that when there was the first version of Maven Central, it was just a file server. So there wasn't really a check if there was a checksum or not. So right now we're in a different era, and almost every artifact has a checksum. So we should be able to activate it by default, but we don't do it this yet. You can set this checksum policy per repository, either in your POM file or in your settings.xml. But the best way is to use a repository manager that verifies if the checksums are correct or not. We are probably going to improve that in a major release, and it will likely be Maven 4, because we expect that for some reason some builds will break because of this change. Let's talk about local repository pollution. So, environmental pollution is caused by developers, whatever, and men must understand these actions. It sounds a little bit like Greenpeace, but in the end, and people that know me already for quite a while know I'm talking about Maven install. Who's running Maven clean install by default? Yes, I was already afraid of that. And I will explain you why. So, the dependency resolution in Maven 2 was broken. In Maven 2, when you were having a Maven multi-module project, it wasn't aware of the reactor, and the reactor are the modules that are part of your build. So you can specify, I only want to build these part of the modules or not, and that's what we call a reactor. Dependencies had to exist in a local repository, so you had to do an install in order to make the dependencies being bound correctly to every project. This has been changed in Maven 3, and it is already like 10 years old, I think. So Maven 3 is reactor aware, so there's no need to run an install anymore. The only thing that install does, it is copying your jar file or whatever to your local repository. That's the only thing. And as we know, and I will show it later, I/O is slow. So even this kind of copying thing, it is a waste of time and resources. Also, the lifecycle, it is kind of broken. So suppose we have a Maven multi-module project and we run Maven like Maven deploy on a multi-module project. So what does Maven do? It will run deploy on module 1, Then on module 2, module 3, and I guess what that you can guess what happens next. So it will do it for every project, run deploy up until the end, and then continue with the next module. Suppose something is broken in module 3, and when we did a Maven deploy. So that means that your module 1 and module 2 are already being deployed to some remote repository, whereas 3 and the other ones are still broken in your local system. And that's probably not a situation you like. This is probably something, if we understand phases, this is what's happening. So validate is actually checking if your project is valid or not. Then you have a whole bunch of phases that are related to the build itself, but in the end there are 2 phases, install and deploy, and they are actually the distribution, either to your local repository or the remote repository. Ideally, Maven should execute it like this. Validate first all the modules. Are they really valid? If one of the modules is not valid, just stop. Then build all the modules. Get your jars, ears, wars, whatever. And in the end, when everything has been built, then you start distributing all those modules. This is something that should be changed in Maven core itself, but it's kind of hard. It is really something in the architecture of the Maven core internals that needs to be changed. So it's right now much easier to fix this in a plugin. So what we did is we introduced this experimental feature. It's a flag and it's called install at end. And what it does, it will wait until all the modules have been built, and once the install goal is called at that time, then it will start installing all those previous modules. And if there's such a flag for the install plugin, of course there's also one for the deploy plugin. Right. It's called deploy at end. Makes sense, right? It is experimental. It works for like 90–95%. The normal Java projects, it should work. If you're working with extensions, if you're aware of that, it can be tricky. I/O is slow. Files are slow. Logging is also very slow. And of course, Maven, it's all about downloading the internet. So also network can be a part of Maven being slow. So Maven says it has the reputation that it downloads the internet, but it's only doing it once. So that's a good thing, right? So, but in the end, Maven does exactly what you tell him to do. If you specify a whole bunch of dependencies, Maven will say, oh, okay, I'm going to download these dependencies and all its transitive dependencies. So be sure that you reduce those number of dependencies. So it's downloading dependencies, parents, plugins as well, and also extensions. Maybe I should do a talk about extensions some other time. Logging. It is actually very slow. So you should aim for a clean Maven output. Especially, I've been working on projects using Spring Boot, and if you're doing unit tests, the first thing you see is like a whole bunch of logging, like starting a Spring Boot application. So never write to system out or system error directly. Just use your logging framework. During testing, you should actually turn off your logging, because it doesn't add anything. Only when things start going wrong, you should verify it with the asserts. And in the extreme, there's this special flag in Maven. It's called quiet. And if you add that, you will see no output at all. It will only end in the end with, OK, I'm done. So to give you an example how this works. Yes. So, yeah, sure. Sorry? Oh, that's interesting. You can have a look here. Sorry, but something is wrong here. Could it be the... Yeah. Did you try turning it off and on again? Right, cool. Okay. The most minimal POM I have right here. So it's, of course, it needs a model version, group ID, artifact ID version, and I'm using the packaging type POM, so nothing is actually happening here. So if I do a Maven, let's do package, even though nothing is happening, you will see that it is finishing in 0.15 seconds. So let's turn on debug. It's doing exactly the same thing, and the time it takes to build is already doubled. So you see the overhead you get with logging. So maybe you say, okay, this is not really fair. Okay, let's pick up a different project. I have here this zip file. I use it almost during every talk because it is old and it still works, and I don't have to do a lot of stuff. So this is a multi-module project. It has a parent, and underneath it, it has a library and application. It's for a weather application. So if I go here, command, Maven, let's now just do validate. That's fast, maybe too fast. Maven package, like I did on the other project. Of course, it is a multi-module project, so it takes a little bit of time. 5, almost says 6 seconds. And if I start adding debug logging, I'm not sure if you want to wait, but I think the message is clear, right? So really try to minimize your logging already during tests, like 15 seconds. Okay, cool. Let's go back to this one. We've seen this. Files. So deleting and replacing the same files is kind of a waste of resources, right? Especially if nothing has been changed. Most Maven plugins are aware if they must execute their task or not. So especially if you're using one of the latest Maven compiler plugins, it knows if the compiler should be executed or not. For that reason, there's actually most of the time no reason to call clean anymore. So like I said, no clean, no install. And I'm going to introduce to you the Maven CI extension. So CI has nothing to do with continuous integration, but it's probably everybody thinks it is, so nobody reads. It's called clean install extension, and let's execute it. I'm going to execute it on the small project, like the minimal one. And maybe some already noticed something here. Let's first do a validate. Okay, Maven clean install. Okay, some people say you're never doing that. That's true, but for this purpose, I'm going to. So what you see right now is there is in the end an extra line. It is saying registrating the clean install. There must be a reason for that, right? Let's execute it again. So now it is saying your previous install was kind of unnecessary, and now you have polluted your local repository. Please be a good citizen and run just Maven verify the next time. So this is the power of the extension. An extension is a little bit different compared to a plugin. Plugin is really related to your build, whereas extensions are, you can really manipulate your Maven builds. Okay, I execute it again, still saying the same message. Bam. Especially this one is interesting, of course, right? So hopefully if people are starting installing these extensions and it is just putting your jar in one of the lib folders, maybe they will be aware about how they should execute Maven. So only use install when you are using that library later on and you don't want to give it already to the remote repository so other people can pick it up. And clean, try to do it without. It should be faster. And if there are plugins, I'm aware of one plugin, the Maven Air plugin. Some people still use it, but that one seems to have an issue with there you must use the clean. Cool. Let's have a look at the properties. Also one thing that can make you aware of works on my machine or not. So the property resolution, there are a couple of places where you can specify your properties, and one of the most common places is of course in your pom.xml. But you can also put them in your settings.xml. Most people don't know this, but you can add profiles to your settings.xml, and inside a profile you can specify properties. There must be a good reason to do that. But of course you can have system properties, and in the end you can also specify them as user properties, like adding -d key is value. Properties are also a little bit broken. So let's have a look at this line. Suppose you're executing this. What will happen, assuming that you're specifying your source target or release value to 12? From this moment on, this library can only be used by Java 12 or above, just by adding this to the command line. It's probably not what you want. If you have a look in the POM file itself, it might say 7, but since you override it via the command line, this is the new and actually used value. So this is maybe a little bit scary. This is a lot scary. So you can really change your Spring version if you're using properties for that to control the version of Spring. You can set it via the command line. So suddenly what you are saying in your POM file doesn't match anymore with how it is being deployed. So don't ever do this. Really don't ever do this, really. This, you could also say, should a Maven solve this? Well, maybe, yes, maybe Maven should actually provide some kind of updated POM. But right now, the whole mechanism is like, I have my POM file in my local system, and it is exactly the same that's being uploaded to your remote repository as being copied to your local repository. No magic, one-on-one, but we discovered that there are a little bit of issues, and this one is really blocking our improvements on Maven. Versions are kind of broken as well. The concept of version is fine, but the way you can use versions is kind of problematic. And one of the things is if you are using branches, especially in Git, and you're going to accept a merge request and the version has changed in a while, then you can have these kinds of conflicts. So the whole issue is make sure your version is unique. And we introduced something for that, and it's called CI-friendly placeholders. It was introduced in Maven 3.5.0, and there are 3 magic placeholders you can use. You can use a revision, SHA-1, or change list. Only these 3 will work, because they are evaluated in a little bit of different way. And with this, it is possible to just inject this value from your build server, for instance, and from that moment on, your versions are unique. However, for multi-modules, you require a hack to rewrite the POM file. And it has to do with this, because if you have your parent in your local system, it will look a little bit like this. So you have your group ID artifact, the end version, and also a relative path. Most of the time you don't specify this because this one is pointing to the POM file one directory above. During your build, there are only 2 things important. So either the relative path is good enough, or the group ID artifact and the ID and version if it is coming from some remote location to pick up your parent. For instance, some kind of company parent. During if it is a dependency and you want to consume it, you must specify the group ID, artifact ID, and version. You don't need the relative path anymore, because what's the relative path inside a remote repository? So only during the build, the relative path makes sense. So to solve these kinds of issues, we're starting with something new, and it's an experimental feature, and it's called Build Consumer, and it should land in Maven 3.7.0. Right, guys? So here are also 2 Maven committers sitting. So we're still having some discussions, but we finally have solved this issue, and Maven 3.7.0 is the first version of Maven that will require Java 8. So right now this is still in Java 7. So let's demo that. I still have, I think, this project. And I'm going to switch to a branch of mine, and we're going to set the version with the versions plugin to make it like a little bit complex to 2.5, and then we're going to introduce a change list, and it's still a snapshot. So what it is doing right now, it is just going to replace all the versions. It's not going to replace. Sorry. I'm forgetting something. It should say new version. Yeah. New version. It's like this, right? So as you can see, now it is overriding all the versions. And if we have a look in one of the POM files, you will see that it has been replaced. So here you now see the change list. If I'm going to build this, just with let's just do the Maven verify. You will see that it is going to complain because it doesn't know the value of change list right now. So we also need to specify this. Change list is, and let's go for Jira 101. So this works. However, the whole issue is that if we're going to do an install, what will happen is it will, of course, build everything, and next it will copy these files to my local repository. Let's have a look here, and let's go web app. Here we have the version and the POM file. Here you see the change list. However, if this one is in your local repository, what is the value of the parent? It isn't aware of the value of change list anymore. So this is a problem you will only see in multi-module projects, but we're going to improve that with this build consumer concept. So right now I'm doing maven.experiment. Build consumer, way too long. Consumer. I don't have to say equals true. This is exactly the same, and this one will enable the specific way of manipulating the POM file. It still thinks it is the same, but this is because of the tool. Because if I'm going to open this one, you will see it has been replaced. So this is kind of cool. So now without doing something with external plugins for the first time, now you see that the POM file has been changed compared to your local one and the one being remote. And starting with this, we can do even more things. So, like I said, well, we know already the relative path, right? So there's no reason for specifying the version. So we should also be able to just remove this. And let's do it again. So what's happening right now is that Maven, with this flag enabled, will recognize, oh, you're probably trying to use this specific version. And if I open this file again, here, you will see it is again injected. So it works for parents. So referring to a parent, you don't have to specify the version anymore. We can go even further, because there's also something that's like dependencies. So here, we could also remove the dependencies, because it is part of the reactor. Maven should be able to know which version I'm trying to use. So we're going to save this. Let's execute it. And I see my time is up, but I'm just going to continue. And again, here, reload, yes. And you will see that the value here is injected. So these are the things we are going to change. These are just small steps. We're just trying to prove this whole concept will work, and from that moment on, we can do magnificent stuff. So let's go through the final stage again. I don't have to have a lot anymore. So change is the only constant. Treat your POM as production code. That means that remove dead code. Remove unused dependencies, plugins, properties, reports. Really, it is as important as your Java code. Keep improving. So that means that locate and optimize time-consuming processes, but also try to automate as much as possible and keep having fun. Be like a responsible pilot, which means that try to understand what every plugin is trying to do. Is it still necessary to add it to your POM file? Stay curious and try to keep informed. And related to that, question outdated answers, especially on Stack Overflow. Try to figure your answers at the source. With this, I'm almost to the end. So there's this up for grabs tag we have at Maven, and this one is quite important because I'm trying to get more contributors. Because as you might know, Maven is being used by 60 to 80% of all Java projects and by all Java developers. We are having like 95 sub-projects, but we're only maintaining this huge, huge project by 5 to 10 active committers. There is no company behind it. So let's restore the balance, and for that you can go to this URL. I will publish it on Twitter as well. And there's also an URL with a committer guide which helps you trying to provide valid pull requests. Thank you for choosing Broken Buildtools and Bad Habits, and enjoy your future flights. Thank you.